Captain Thomas Doyle had a shameful secret that nearly cost the lives of his entire platoon. Iwo Jima, February 1945. He was addicted to cigarettes. Not the kind of addiction you smoke socially. It was the kind that wakes you up at 3 in the morning with trembling hands, begging for a drag. On the 5th night of combat, he gave in to the impulse. He lit a cigarette inside the trench. The orange ember illuminated the darkness for less than 3 seconds. Enough time for a Japanese sniper to locate the position. 7 men died that night because my uncle couldn't control a stupid impulse. Today you're not in a trench, but your weak impulses kill you just the same. On that bloody dawn, while carrying the bodies of men who had died because of their weakness, Captain Doyle made a brutal decision. He would completely reprogram his brain or die trying. He spent the next 30 days using a method so violent that it shattered who he was and rebuilt something entirely new. It wasn't meditation. It wasn't willpower. It was a mental reprogramming system that soldiers used to survive when their minds screamed to give up. You are about to discover how a nicotine addict transformed into the most disciplined officer in the Pacific Campaign. You will understand why your weak impulses are not character flaws, but faulty programming that can be rewritten. And you will learn the exact method that transforms slaves of their own desires into commanders of their own minds. I found my uncle's diary inside a locked metal box in the attic, 3 months after the funeral. The key was attached to a medal he never wore, hidden deep in a drawer no one opened. When I started reading, I understood why. Those pages didn't tell stories of heroism. They were telling the brutal truth about a man who nearly destroyed an entire platoon because he couldn't control the pathetic urge to smoke a cigarette. Captain Thomas Doyle didn't die on Iwo Jima, but a part of him died on that volcanic island. The weak part. The part that obeyed every idiotic whim that popped into his head. And what was born in its place was something completely different. Iwo Jima, February 1945. 21 square kilometers of black volcanic rock and grey sand. The temperature oscillated violently between the unbearable heat of the day and the biting cold of the night. Captain Doyle commanded 42 men of Charlie Company, all entrenched on the island's southern flank, awaiting orders to advance against the heavily fortified Japanese positions in the caves. He had smoked 2 packs a day since he was 17. It wasn't a choice. It was a compulsion. His fingers trembled when he went more than 2 hours without nicotine. His mind conjured up elaborate excuses, sophisticated rationalizations, emotional justifications for that self-destructive behavior he knew was pathetic. On the 5th night of combat, at 3:42 in the morning, he awoke with his body begging for a cigarette. His mind didn't ask if it was safe. It didn't assess the risk. It didn't consider the consequences. It simply ordered, "Smoke now." And he obeyed, as he always obeyed. He took the pack hidden in the inside pocket of his uniform, shielded the lighter's flame with both hands, and lit it. The orange ember illuminated the trench for less than 3 seconds. A Japanese sniper positioned 200 meters away saw that tiny light and calculated the perfect trajectory. The first shot hit Private Henry Carter in the throat. The second pierced Corporal Franklin Miles' lung. In the following 15 minutes, 5 more men died trying to evacuate the wounded, while the Japanese concentrated fire on that now revealed position. 7 deaths. 7 men who had families, dreams, futures. Dead because a 31-year-old officer couldn't control a stupid impulse for 3 damned hours. My uncle wrote in his diary that that was the night he understood a devastating truth. His weak impulses weren't harmless. They were deadly. And if he didn't completely reprogram his brain, he would not only kill more men, but die as a pathetic slave to his own desires. If you're reading this now, don't abandon Captain Doyle in that bloody trench. Leave a like. He needs you to understand what happened in the following 30 days, so you can stop being a hostage to your own weak impulses. That like is your confirmation that you're ready to discover the brutal method that transforms slaves into commanders. For the 6 hours following that bloody night, while bodies were removed from the trench and the wounded groaned awaiting evacuation, Captain Doyle sat with his back against the cold earthen wall, staring at the pack of cigarettes in his hand. He didn't smoke any. Not because he had the willpower, but because he was paralyzed by a brutal revelation. He hadn't chosen to light that cigarette. The impulse had chosen for him. His rational mind, his conscious identity, his stated will to keep the men safe. None of that mattered when his brain decided it needed nicotine. And in that moment of devastating clarity, my uncle understood that he was at war with something far more dangerous than Japanese soldiers. He was at war with his own mental programming. He wrote in his diary an analysis that reads like it was done by a scientist, not a soldier broken by guilt. He described how the impulse arose, first a vague physical sensation of discomfort, then a seemingly innocent thought about smoking, then an elaborate, rational justification, and finally, an uncontrollable emotional urge that eliminated any capacity for logical reasoning. The whole process lasted less than 90 seconds. 90 seconds between feeling the first discomfort and having the lit cigarette in his mouth, completely blind to the deadly consequences of that idiotic decision. My uncle realized something most people never understand. Impulses aren't you. They're automatic programs running in your brain, created through repetition, reinforced by chemical rewards, strengthened each time you obey. When he lit a cigarette, he wasn't making a free choice. He was executing a mental script recorded by thousands of previous repetitions, and each act of obedience made that script stronger, faster, harder to interrupt. He had created a neurological monster that now controlled his actions without needing his permission. The most disturbing part of the discovery was realizing that this didn't just apply to cigarettes. It applied to everything. Every time he postponed a difficult decision, he was strengthening the mental program of procrastination. Every time he gave in to anger and yelled at a soldier, he was further engraving the pattern of emotional dysregulation. Every time he chose comfort over discipline, he was programming his brain to automatically seek the easy way out, without consulting his conscious will. And the end result was a man who didn't control his own mind, but was controlled by idiotic impulses created by bad choices repeated 1,000 times. The following morning, Captain Doyle made the most violent decision of his life. He would declare total war on his own impulses. He wouldn't try to control them with willpower, because he had already learned that willpower is a finite resource that runs out when you are tired, stressed, or under enemy fire. He would reprogram them completely. And the method he chose was brutal in its simplicity. Interrupt the pattern with each repetition. Create pain associated with obeying the impulse, and build a new mental script through conscious and relentless repetition. He took the pack of cigarettes that had killed 7 men and put it in the left pocket of his uniform. He didn't throw it away. He didn't ask anyone to hide it. He kept it there, always accessible, because reprogramming doesn't work by avoiding temptation. It works by facing temptation repeatedly until the brain learns a different pattern. My uncle wrote in his diary, "Soldiers don't win battles by avoiding the enemy. They win by facing the enemy so many times that they develop automatic combat reflexes." I'm going to train my brain the same way. Every impulse is an enemy. Every time I face it and see it, the old pattern weakens and the new one strengthens. The protocol was simple but devastating. When the urge to smoke arose, instead of ignoring it or trying to distract himself, Doyle did the exact opposite. He focused completely on that urge. He felt the physical sensation of discomfort. He observed the justifying thoughts arising. He noticed the growing emotional urgency. But instead of obeying, he held firm and forced his mind to visualize, in cinematic and visceral detail, the scene of 7 men dying because of that pathetic weakness. He saw Franklin Miles's blood gushing out. He heard Private Carter's screams as he drowned in his own blood. He smelled the burnt flesh and gunpowder mixed with cigarette smoke. He maintained that brutal visualization until the impulse broke. Sometimes it took 2 minutes, sometimes 15. But every time the impulse broke without being obeyed, the old neurological pattern grew a little weaker, and the new pattern associated with pain and death grew a little stronger. It wasn't Zen meditation. It was combat conditioning. It was teaching the brain that obeying weak impulses doesn't bring temporary pleasure. It brings deadly consequences. And after 30 days of repeating this protocol dozens of times a day, Captain Doyle's brain had been completely reprogrammed. The first 7 days were a psychological hell. that nearly broke my uncle completely. His brain wasn't just craving nicotine, it was literally screaming for it. Every cell in his body seemed to be in revolt. His hands trembled uncontrollably. Sweat poured down even in the cold of the early morning. The irritability was so intense that he had to bite his tongue until it bled to avoid exploding at the soldiers for no reason. But the most brutal part wasn't the physical discomfort. It was the mental warfare. His own mind became his enemy, creating increasingly elaborate justifications, increasingly convincing rationalizations, increasingly manipulative emotional arguments to make him give in. On the fifth day, his brain tried a different strategy: bargaining. Just one cigarette won't make a difference. You've already proven your point. You're strong enough. One cigarette to ease this suffering, and then you continue. Doyle recognized this for what it truly was: the old pattern trying to survive through negotiation. He wrote in his diary, "My mind is lying to me with the voice of reason. It's selling me destruction packaged as relief. And the only way to win this war is to recognize that thoughts are not facts, impulses are not commands, and feelings of urgency are not real emergencies." On the 14th day, something changed. The impulse still arose, but it was weaker, less convincing, easier to observe without obeying. My uncle had created a space between the stimulus and the response. For the first time in 14 years, he was no longer an automatic slave to his own brain. He could feel the impulse arising and consciously choose not to follow it. That 3-second space between feeling the urge and making the decision was the difference between being human and being a programmed machine. And he had conquered that space through brutal repetition, facing the inner enemy dozens of times a day without retreating. On the 30th day, Captain Doyle smoked his last cigarette. Not on impulse, but by conscious and deliberate choice. He lit it, took a drag, tasted the bitter flavor of something that no longer brought him any pleasure, and spat it out. The pattern was dead. The new script was recorded. He had won the first battle of mental reprogramming, and the soldiers under his command began to notice that something had radically changed in that officer who had once been explosive and unpredictable. If you've made it this far, don't let Captain Doyle fight this battle alone. Subscribe to this channel now. He endured 30 days of mental hell to prove that it's possible to completely reprogram the brain. This subscription is your declaration that you're ready to stop obeying weak impulses and start commanding your own mind. Overcoming nicotine addiction was only the first battle. Captain Doyle quickly realized that his brain was infested with self-destructive programs that went far beyond cigarettes. There was the urge to postpone difficult decisions, always waiting for a more convenient moment that never came. There was the pattern of exploding in anger when frustrated, taking out his unmanageable pressure on innocent soldiers. There was the compulsion to seek immediate comfort whenever he felt fear or anxiety, even when that comfort sabotaged greater goals. And each of these patterns had been ingrained through thousands of unconscious repetitions over decades. He began applying the same brutal protocol to every weak impulse he identified. When he felt the urge to postpone a difficult order, instead of automatically giving in, he would pause, observe the impulse arising, visualize the deadly consequences of procrastination in combat, and force immediate action even with the discomfort screaming to wait. When anger exploded within him, instead of releasing it instantly, he would hold back that violent emotion, feel the heat rising in his chest, observe the justifying thoughts, and consciously choose a different response. It wasn't suppressing anger. It was creating a space between feeling anger and acting on anger. The diary shows that my uncle catalogued 17 different mental patterns that needed reprogramming. Some were obvious, like the tendency to blame others for his own mistakes. Others were subtle, like the habit of seeking external approval before trusting his own judgment. But they all followed the same structure: a trigger, an automatic response, and a temporary chemical reward that reinforced the pattern. And they could all be reprogrammed using the same method: interrupt the automatism, create an association of pain with obeying the impulse, and repeat the new pattern until it became the default script. What impressed the soldiers under his command was not that Doyle had become perfect. It was that he had become self-aware. They saw an officer who paused before reacting, who observed his own thoughts before turning them into actions. who deliberately chose instead of simply executing old programming. And that awareness created a completely different command presence. It wasn't the kind of leadership based on positional authority or shouting the loudest. It was leadership based on genuine self-mastery, the kind of respect that only arises when men realize they are standing before someone who has won the most difficult war, the war against himself. You're not on Iwo Jima. You're not commanding soldiers under enemy fire. You don't bear the responsibility of keeping 42 men alive on a literal battlefield, but you're fighting the exact same war that nearly destroyed my uncle before he had the courage to reprogram his own brain. The only difference is that your weak impulses don't come disguised as cigarettes. They come disguised as endless scrolling on your phone at 3 in the morning when you should be sleeping. They come as the third serving of food your body doesn't need, but your mind demands. They come as the decision to postpone that difficult conversation, that important project, that necessary change for another day. Your weak impulses don't kill soldiers in trenches. They kill better versions of yourself that could have existed. They kill relationships that could have been saved if you had controlled your anger instead of exploding. They kill careers that could have taken off if you had overcome procrastination. They kill the health you could have maintained if you had reprogrammed your self-destructive patterns. And the most brutal part is that you know it. You know you're wasting your life obeying idiotic impulses. But you keep obeying because mental reprogramming seems too difficult, too painful, too scary. Captain Doyle wrote something in his journal that should be etched in every man's mind. The pain of discipline is temporary and builds strength. The pain of regret is permanent and destroys the soul. You will suffer either way. The question is, do you want to suffer by growing or suffer by rotting? He chose to suffer the 30 days of brutal reprogramming because he understood that that suffering had a purpose, an end, and a reward. The suffering of continuing to be a slave to one's own impulses had none of these three things. It was merely slow and meaningless destruction. The truth no one wants to hear is this: you won't change through motivation. Motivation is a feeling that lasts 3 days and disappears when things get tough. You won't change through willpower. Willpower is a limited resource that runs out when you're tired or stressed. You will only change when you reprogram the automatic scripts that govern 90% of your daily actions. And reprogramming requires conscious, brutal, and relentless repetition, confronting the impulse dozens of times until the old pattern dies and the new one is born. Don't let Captain Doyle carry the weight of this transformation alone. Leave your like now. He proved that it's possible to win the war against weak impulses when you stop negotiating with them and start systematically reprogramming them. This like confirms that you understood. Real change doesn't come from inspiration. It comes from brutal and conscious mental reprogramming. March 1945. 3 weeks after completing the mental reprogramming protocol, Captain Doyle faced the most brutal test of his transformation. Charlie Company was ordered to advance against a fortified Japanese position atop a strategic hill. Military intelligence estimated 70% casualties. 70%. That meant that of 42 men, only 13 would return alive. And Doyle knew that his old mental patterns would have found 1,000 ways to delay that order, to question the strategy, to procrastinate until another officer took responsibility. But something had fundamentally changed within him. When the impulse to procrastinate arose, screaming to wait for more information, to call for reinforcements, to escalate the decision, he recognized it for what it truly was. The old pattern of escape through procrastination, an attempt to survive. And instead of obeying that cowardly impulse disguised as rational caution, he paused, observed the fear rising, felt the urgency to avoid responsibility, and consciously chose to act despite the paralyzing terror. Not because he was brave, because he had trained his brain not to be held hostage by weak impulses. The battle lasted 7 hours. It was brutal, bloody, exactly as deadly as intelligence had predicted. But what set that battle apart from all previous ones was Doyle's mental clarity during the chaos. Every tactical decision was made with full awareness, not with automatic reaction based on fear or anger. When soldiers panicked, he didn't explode in shouts as he had before. He observed the anger rising, recognized the impulse to lose control, and chose to respond with calm firmness. When exhaustion begged him to retreat, he identified the impulse to seek comfort, associated that with mission failure, and continued advancing. 29 men died on that hill, 13 survived, and each of the 13 knew he was alive because his officer had won the war against himself before commanding them in the war against the enemy. Doyle wrote in his diary that night, his hands still trembling with adrenaline, "I learned today that men who master their own minds can lead others through hell. Men enslaved by their own impulses lead others to hell. The difference between leadership and destruction is not in charisma or intelligence. It is in self-mastery gained through brutal and conscious reprogramming." The war ended in August 1945. Captain Thomas Doyle returned home with 3 medals, which he kept in a drawer and never showed to anyone. But he also brought something far more valuable, the brutal knowledge that weak impulses are more deadly than bullets when you lack the awareness to confront them. He lived to be 89. He built a construction company from scratch. He maintained his marriage for 62 years. He raised 4 children who became upright and functional individuals. And all of this was possible because he had learned on Iwo Jima that men are not slaves to impulses unless they choose to be. You're facing the same battle right now. Maybe it's not nicotine. Maybe it's pornography at 3 in the morning when you promised yourself you'd quit. Maybe it's emotional eating that's slowly destroying your health. Maybe it's explosive anger that's ruining your relationships. Maybe it's chronic procrastination that's killing your dreams one day at a time. Maybe it's endless scrolling on your phone that's stealing hundreds of hours you'll never get back. But whatever your specific weak urge is, it works exactly the same way. It arises as a physical sensation, evolves into justifying thought, transforms into emotional urgency, and completely hijacks you in less than 90 seconds. And the tragedy is that you've already tried to change. You've promised 1,000 times that you'd be different tomorrow. You've felt ashamed, guilty, a failure because you gave in once again to the same idiotic pattern. But you never truly changed because you never understood that change doesn't come from an emotional decision in a moment of inspiration. Change comes from neurological reprogramming through conscious and brutal repetition. It comes from confronting the impulse dozens of times without obeying, until the brain learns a completely new script. My uncle wrote on the last page of his diary, 60 years after Iwo Jima, a sentence that sums up his entire philosophy of life. Weak men obey impulses and call it human nature. Strong men reprogram impulses and call it discipline. The difference between the two is not talent or luck. It is the willingness to suffer consciously during reprogramming instead of suffering unconsciously as a slave. He chose to suffer for 30 days, reprogramming his brain. And those 30 days of conscious suffering saved 60 years of life that could have been wasted in automatic slavery. I closed my uncle's diary with trembling hands, not from fear, but from brutal clarity. For 38 years of my life, I had been a slave to my own weak impulses and called it normal. I postponed dreams because the impulse for comfort screamed louder than the desire to build something meaningful. I destroyed relationships because the impulse of anger controlled my tongue before conscience could intervene. I wasted thousands of hours obeying the idiotic impulse of endless scrolling while important projects rotted in closed drawers. And all this time, I thought the problem was a lack of motivation, a lack of discipline, a lack of willpower. But the real problem was that I had never understood that impulses are programs, not destiny. Captain Thomas Doyle died in 2019. At his funeral, 13 veterans showed up, all over 90 years old, all still alive, because one officer had won the war against himself before leading them through hell. They didn't talk about the battles they won. They talked about the man who taught, through brutal and silent example, that self-mastery is not innate talent or genetic luck. It's conscious reprogramming, repeated until new patterns replace old ones. The last entry in the diary is from a week before his death. My uncle wrote in trembling but firm handwriting, "I spent 89 years in this world. 74 of those years were possible because I learned on Iwo Jima that men don't need to obey impulses. They can observe them, recognize them as faulty programming, and consciously choose different scripts. If you are reading this, understand. Your weak impulses will slowly destroy you until nothing remains but regret and shame, unless you declare total war against them, unless you reprogram your brain through brutal repetition, unless you stop negotiating with weakness and start commanding your own mind. You've reached the end of this story, but your reprogramming is about to begin, and now you have a choice. You can close this video and return to the comfortable slavery of your weak impulses, automatically obeying until you die full of regrets. Or you can decide that today, now at this very moment, you begin the most important mental war of your life. Don't abandon Captain Doyle in that trench on Iwo Jima. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment telling us which weak impulse you will reprogram first. Help this channel bring more stories of soldiers who learned that winning the war against themselves is more important than winning any external war. Your transformation begins when you stop obeying impulses and start reprogramming them. Captain Doyle killed 7 men by obeying a weak impulse for 3 seconds. He spent 30 days undergoing brutal reprogramming and saved 13 lives in the final test. He understood that impulses are not you. They are automatic programs that can be rewritten through conscious repetition. The difference between slavery and freedom lies not in eliminating impulses, but in reprogramming them. What weak impulse is controlling your life now and silently destroying your future?